What if the Gulf Stream collapsed? Imagine a snow-covered beach in sunny Florida. The ocean waves freeze mid-splash, and palm trees glisten with ice. Across the Atlantic, the medieval streets of Paris are buried under relentless snowfall, while crops across Europe wither under the strain of prolonged winters. This chilling vision of environmental upheaval could become reality if the Gulf Stream, a critical ocean current that regulates the Earth's climate, suddenly collapses. What would this mean for America, Europe, and the rest of the world? In this video, we'll explore the potential short and long-term impacts, from environmental devastation to economic instability and geopolitical chaos. Prepare to learn how this collapse could reshape nations and lives, and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy content like this, make sure to subscribe for more thought-provoking explorations of climate futures. The Gulf Stream is a powerful warm ocean current that flows from the Gulf of Mexico, up the eastern coast of the United States, and across the Atlantic Ocean to Europe. It acts as the Earth's thermostat, distributing heat and regulating weather patterns across the planet. Without it, our climate as we know it would descend into chaos. The Gulf Stream is part of a larger system called the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, AMOC. Cold, dense water sinks in the northern Atlantic, while warm, lighter water flows from the tropics to replace it. This delicate balance keeps Europe warm, stabilizes rain patterns in Africa, and minimizes hurricane activity in the Atlantic. But this system isn't invincible. Factors like rising sea temperatures, melting polar ice caps, and increased freshwater influx into the Atlantic are weakening the Gulf Stream. A total collapse may not be far-fetched. Scientists warn that the system is at its weakest point in over 1,000 years. What would happen if it collapsed entirely? Let's break it down. A sudden collapse of the Gulf Stream would send shockwaves through weather patterns worldwide. In America, it could mean catastrophic hurricanes striking the East Coast with unprecedented frequency and strength. Large coastal cities like Miami and New York would face intense flooding, storm damage, and rapid loss of infrastructure. For Europe, the issue is quite the opposite. Without the Gulf Stream's warm waters to temper winters, Europe could face a mini ice age. Imagine sub-zero winters stretching over months, freezing rivers, and a collapse in energy systems dependent on temperate weather conditions. Meanwhile, developing nations in Africa and Central America would bear the brunt of disrupted monsoon cycles and failing crops. These regions, already vulnerable to climate instability, could spiral into humanitarian crises as rainfall becomes erratic and, in some areas, vanishes entirely. The Arctic ecosystem would also face tragic outcomes. As the ice caps melt faster due to the imbalance, rising sea levels would swallow coastal cities globally, and key species such as polar bears and seals would lose their natural habitats. The long-term consequences would be even more devastating, reshaping ecosystems, economies, and societies for decades to come. In America, the breadbasket states that produce wheat, corn, and other staples could face prolonged droughts. Vast farmlands would become barren, triggering food shortages and skyrocketing prices. Entire communities might be forced to relocate inland as coastal areas become uninhabitable due to rising sea levels and floods. In Europe, the cost to heat homes and power cities during relentless winters would cripple energy sectors. Crops such as wheat, olive trees, and vineyards native to Mediterranean climates could fail, dragging economies reliant on agriculture into recession. Over time, protracted winters could lead to population declines and ignite further migrations southward. Globally, the ripple effects would be disastrous. Rain-dependent regions in Africa, Asia, and South America could experience famine as agricultural yields collapse. This would spark massive climate-driven migrations, with millions seeking refuge in wealthier nations ill-equipped to handle such large-scale upheaval. Economically, nations reliant on stable climates for industry, energy production, and trade would collapse or face severe instability. Supply chains would crumble, insurance premiums would soar, and national debts would skyrocket as governments scramble to mitigate damage. The collapse of the Gulf Stream would spark unprecedented geopolitical challenges. First, rising numbers of climate refugees would strain borders and ignite diplomatic tensions. Nations like the United States and European countries might face moral and ethical dilemmas about accepting refugees, creating conflicts that could escalate into wars. Second, the competition for scarce resources, be it food, fresh water, or land suitable for farming, would likely lead to what some experts call resource wars. Countries might prioritize their own citizens' survival, prompting a breakdown of international cooperation. Moreover, global superpowers could experience significant political shifts. The United States and Europe, heavily reliant on stable infrastructure and agriculture, might see a decline in influence as domestic challenges consume their focus. Meanwhile, countries with abundant resources or less reliance on Gulf Stream-driven systems, such as Russia or Canada, could emerge as geopolitical winners, at least initially. This new world order would likely favor survivalist, isolationist policies over cooperation, deepening divides in a world already grappling with socio-economic inequalities. Certain nations would be particularly vulnerable to the Gulf Stream's collapse. In America, the East Coast cities like New York, Miami, and Boston would face the twin threats of increased hurricanes and flooding. Agricultural states like Kansas and Iowa would bear the economic brunt of prolonged droughts. Europe would also suffer. Coastal nations like the United Kingdom and Ireland could see their harbors freeze over, disrupting trade and livelihoods. Countries like the Netherlands, which sit below sea level, might endure catastrophic flooding, forcing mass evacuations. In developing regions, the stakes are even higher. African nations reliant on consistent rainfall for agriculture would face unprecedented famine. Island nations like the Maldives or Caribbean nations could disappear entirely under rising seas. For Arctic nations, the loss of ice cover would disrupt ecosystems, endanger indigenous communities, and pivot geo-economic focus to exploit natural resources. While a Gulf Stream collapse would be devastating, it is not entirely inevitable. Humanity still has a chance to take action that could slow or even reverse these catastrophic trends. The first solution is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Quickly transitioning to clean energy sources, protecting forests, and enforcing international climate agreements like the Paris Accord are critical. By slowing the rate of global warming, we may preserve the delicate balance driving the Gulf Stream. Another possible approach involves technological interventions, such as geoengineering. However, drastic measures like injecting sulfate aerosols into the atmosphere or artificially cooling the planet through reflective technologies come with significant risks and ethical dilemmas. Ultimately, preventing a Gulf Stream collapse will require unprecedented global cooperation. Nations must act decisively to reduce emissions, invest in sustainable technologies, and support vulnerable populations already on the front lines of climate change. So, what do you think? Are we prepared for a world where the Gulf Stream collapses? Could our current international policies be enough to stave off such a catastrophe, or are we too late? We'd love to hear your ideas. Share your theories in the comments below. How would you imagine life changing in your region? What steps do you believe the world should take? And if you found this video thought-provoking, consider subscribing to our channel. We'll continue to explore the speculative but urgent questions surrounding our changing climate. Together, we can stay informed, spread awareness, and work towards meaningful change. It's up to all of us, environmentalists or not, to keep this conversation alive. Because while the Gulf Stream may seem distant, its collapse could hit closer to home than we ever anticipated.